you, Barney.
What happened to your drawings?
Punishment, you see, for MIGs. Just like that gospel program. When you leave, they'll turn the volume way up. Dr. Chilton does enjoy his petty torments.
What did you mean by transformation, Doctor?
I've been in this room for 8 years now, Clarice. I know they will never, ever let me out while I'm alive. What I want is a view. I want a window where I can see a tree, or even water. I want to be in a federal institution far away from Dr. Chilton.
What did you mean by fledgling killer? Are you saying that he's killed again?
I'm offering you a psychological profile of Buffalo Bill based on the case evidence. I'll help you catch him, Clary.
It has been established that persons who have recently died have been returning to life and committing acts of murder. The unburied dead are coming back to life and seeking human victims.
This week on a podcast from beneath, The Silence of the Lambs. Aaron, how's it going?
Quid pro quo, Carey. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
I'm doing fine, man.
William, how you been?
I'm doing good, thanks. Good to see you again, and looking forward to discussing Silence of the Lambs. I just read the book yesterday, so and watched the movie again, so I'm fully prepared.
Ready to go. All right, and
he's more prepared than me. Go ahead.
And now back at it. Hasn't been on here for a long time. Erik, welcome back, sir.
It's an honor to be the second of two bald-headed directors
Yes.
on this episode again. And I've missed you guys, so thank you for having me back,
we
as
missed
always.
you too. Couldn't wait to get you back on here.
Yeah.
All right, so this week we're going to talk about, from 1991, The Silence of the Lambs. My first question, open to anybody who wants to jump in and answer it. Why does this movie not look or feel like a Hollywood movie?
To me, I think it looks more gritty to me. It doesn't, it's not stylized. It's just, I think the whole story itself, I love this movie. I've loved it ever since I saw it the first time. And it really draws you in. It feels like you're watching, kind of like a documentary. They're looking for this serial killer. And that's why I think it doesn't really feel like a Hollywood movie.
And I was actually going to just say it has a quasi-documentary quality to it. I mean, I've expressed a million times just with you guys that The Exorcist is like my favorite movie of all time. And Silence of the Lambs looks like something that William Friedkin could have directed.
And it also, when I watch films today, even when I watch like trailers for Army of the Dead that just came out, or watch clips from that, there's a great difference between the way movies are being shot now and the way they were being shot in 1991. One of the big things in Silence of the Lambs is the amount of scenes where you have the actors speaking directly to the camera. And it's not just Hannibal Lecter, it's Jodie Foster also, and sometimes when she's speaking to some of the people that she's getting information from. Fairly late in the film, there's a scene where she finds that young woman that worked with the person the seamstress who is hiring Buffalo Bill. And when she's interviewing her, it's her speaking directly to the camera and Jodie Foster speaking directly to the camera, back and forth in that fashion. So that's very unusual for Hollywood film.
They're also each character, because I noticed that too, like whenever Scott Glenn's talking to her, the characters are center framed. Like, almost like they're talking to you, the viewer, kind of.
Yeah.
There is something to be said for the fact that, before the days of television widescreen, there were a number of films where the notion of cropping for home video and cable release did inspire some cinematographers to really kind of frame things center or cluster people together where they might normally be spread out. Because, the 1980s, that's when we saw the home video explosion happen. And it's why I discovered, for example, Star Wars in widescreen, apart from the theatrical screenings that I saw as a very young kid. But when those were some of the first films that were released to your video store where you could purchase them in letterbox, and knowing those films like the back of my hand, I was realizing just how damaging the cropping was, not just to the special effects, but in certain sequences, the way that characters and their motivations, their actions, the "no, I am your father" scene in The Empire Strikes Back. Watch a pan and scan version of that, and it completely changes Luke's motivation for jumping off the gantry. So at any rate, the point is that, in those days when most people were going to see a film on video and on television, and the studios were aware of the money that could be made in that format, I think a lot of cinematographers were thinking along those lines as well. They didn't want to see their work butchered.
Well, this is actually something that came up in the last conversation we had about Bloodbeat, because there's a story that the cinematographer of that film put around that he didn't know he was shooting this for theatrical release. He didn't know it was supposed to be a widescreen movie until like 5 days into the production. And I couldn't really understand how that could work. Some of the people who commented about this online, they were talking about the way video cameras work, because I guess that's the thing they're familiar with. And they were thinking of people being able to switch back and forth between a full screen image and a widescreen image, the sort of fake widescreen, on old standard definition video cameras. Now, of course, all that's changed because everything is 16:9. But you're right, back at that time, they probably shot this movie open matte, I guess they call it. And then when for a theatrical release, either they put a mat on it or it was just distributed to theaters with instructions to the operator to get an aperture plate for the projector that would cut the top and the bottom of the picture off. Then when they went to TV, and I'm sure the network television sales for a film like this were a lot of money involved, they could just take the mat away and they would have a picture that fit right into an analog TV screen frame. So you're probably right. That did also influence the positioning of the characters in the shot. And I always feel that with movies like this and with other Hollywood films from that time, to a certain extent, we get slightly less exciting cinematography because they were forced to sort of always remember that this is going to be on TV. They weren't able to do sort of grand vistas that you might see in Lawrence of Arabia or something like that. But still, the cinematography in this is beautiful. And what I particularly like is that we weren't yet at the point where everybody felt that you had to do a lot of post-production processing of the image. It's not all green or not all blue, not desaturated. They're not trying to force that sort of fake grittiness on the thing. It's gritty when it needs to be, like when we're down in the dungeon, in Buffalo Bill's lair. And that feels more effective to me because it isn't fake. It is actually the place we're in. It's that gives you the creeps. It's not because they've played with the image in some way and discolored it or distorted it in some way.
Yeah, it's a very muddy looking film, I would say. Just my memories of that film, whenever I think about it, are of browns. It's a very muddy looking picture. And look, I just want to say something because Mr. Poe already said, that he loves this film. And at the risk of anyone ever accusing me of burying the lead, I just want to throw this out here because I don't know how the other three of you feel, but I think that The Silence of the Lambs is profoundly overrated, and I cannot connect with it on any level. I never have been able to connect with it. I recognize the artistry on display, and I recognize the thoughtfulness of intent. The film feels to me like something that Ridley Scott or Christopher Nolan would direct, Stanley Kubrick. It feels like it's assembled by a computer approximating human emotion, but the film just feels very empty and soulless to me, and there isn't a lot of humanity. And I again, I realize the subject matter at hand, and yet I feel that we need to be able to connect with at least our protagonist, and that does not happen for me. I realize I'm in a minority, but I'll be the angry man shouting at the cloud for this.
Well, and no, I mean, you're right. The without real life events, I don't think Silence of the Lambs wouldn't even existed, because to me, because I'm big into, following serial killer documentaries, all this stuff. What it reminds me of is, this story reminds me of when they were looking for the Green River Killer and they went to Ed Kemper in prison. And Ed Kemper, they're like, okay, is this yours? And he was such an open book. He was like, no, you got another monster on your hands. So of course the FBI was looking for it. Well, this is kind of the same thing where they're using Hannibal Lecter. They've caught him. Will Graham caught him. And now they're like, okay, we got some psycho. We need to get insight to a psycho's mind, which is pretty hard to do. As we see in the movie, he plays the cat and mouse thing. He's a very, manipulative guy. He knows how to play those mind games. But that's what this story reminds me of. And of course, Buffalo Bill, that's Ed Gein. That's Ed Gein right there. So,
yeah, and there's another component, and this is a personal one. This is my own bias and prejudice, but not to invoke the name of The Exorcist again. I am wearing a Pazuzu amulet around my neck right now. But when I saw previews when I was in high school, and I saw previews back in '91 for Silence of the Lambs, the first thing I said was, wait, this is just The Exorcist 3. I just saw The Exorcist 3 last year. It's a law enforcement person who's going into an isolation tank to talk to a serial killer, trying to track down, trying to determine the motivations of the killer at large. Except this one it doesn't have any demons. It doesn't have any, body hopping or possession or anything like that. And that has always been a stumbling block for me. And simply by virtue of the fact that Exorcist 3 came out, I know that you have discussed it. We've all discussed it on this show. And its relative merits and deficiencies, both in the director's cut and in the existing theatrical version, most people know. With that being said, though, you watch the previews mere months after The Exorcist 3 comes out, and I mean, there were just so many shots of entering that isolation tank, and the fact that Brad Dourif in The Exorcist 3 gives these tremendously frightening monologues, often directly to the camera. And we're seeing that with Sir Anthony Hopkins. And it just feels redundant to me. So that's always been an issue. It's not the overriding issue. I just throw that out as a personal bias.
Yeah, see, I don't think I connect with Jodie Foster's character either. But for me, I feel like I don't think that she's the reason that we're watching the movie. I think she's just there as just moving us through. But I feel like we're really there for Hannibal and Buffalo Bill. That's when I watch it. That's what I feel like.
Well, let me just throw onto the pile here my biggest problem with the film, and that is Jodie Foster. It's Jodie Foster all the way. And you're laughing. I don't know if you know where I'm going, but that is the character that we need to be able to identify with. She is our entry into this universe. And the problem is, and just bear with me, the problem with Jodie Foster is Jodie Foster's voice. I'm Jodie Foster. Yeah. I got this voice going on. And that's not that, it's not an attack on the way that she talks. Rather, it is the fact that I think Jodie Foster is an actor with a very, very limited range. She is very good at playing Jodie Foster. And she falls into this sort of category with Jack Nicholson and Richard Gere and Kevin Costner, where, you know, they're fantastic at giving performances as themselves, just with different names. And you know, you never watch a Jack Nicholson performance and not go, that's Jack Nicholson. You never buy into the character. And Jodie Foster is the same way. And whether you like her voice or you dislike her voice, that voice is always there. And it just reminds me, she is an actor, which means to act like someone else. And every time you watch a Jodie Foster movie, it's always that same voice. It's always the same mannerisms. And, you know, I mean, that brings it around to the other problem with her. And that is the fact that, you know, she's best known for kind of, you know, being, I guess, kind of a Natalie Portman in The Professional of her day, you know, in Taxi Driver, and then being very well known for the fact that she, you know, nearly inspired an assassination attempt to win her favor. Then there's Silence of the Lambs. Go beyond Silence of the Lambs. She hasn't made many good films. She's been in a lot of very, very shitty films, and she does a tremendous job in them. It's just that she is doing a tremendous job of putting herself into that situation rather than inhabiting the character.
Well, I'm leaving the show now because he's talking about Nell, and I'm not going to have anybody.
Okay,
Okay.
Now okay. You got a couple of oddballs. Nell is one where you know she falls in. But again, I still have trouble watching Nell and not seeing Jodie Foster. But I mean, Contact, Panic Room. I mean, who gives a shit?
I know.
But she's heralded as this, you know, very, very strong actor. And maybe a lot of that has to do with sort of the role of women in Hollywood, particularly at that time. I can't see anything but her in everything that she does. And that really pulls me out of Silence of the Lambs, because we need to identify with that character and really sort of feel her plight. Try a different voice, Jodie. Just try a different voice. Actors do it all the time. That's part of your job.
Now, when this movie came out in 91, for some reason I really didn't pay attention to it a lot. So it was one of these, like, you go to the movie rental place and there it is. It came out and you rent it and watch it. And I really enjoyed it. So I've never read the book. Is there any big differences between the book and the movie? Is the book more enjoyable? I guess the book's always better, but.
Well, I'm always reluctant to read that type of book because, first of all, I don't have any great interest in immersing myself in the world of serial killers. I don't think it's a healthy frame of mind to be in for an extended period. But I have to admit, when I was trying to get an understanding of Thomas Harris's thinking on the whole trans issue, which seems to me to be the main flaw. I disagree completely with the view that Jodie Foster isn't good in this. I think Jodie Foster is perfect in this, and I think that character, along with Ripley in Alien, are probably the two best examples of a female lead in action or thriller movies. The test is, can men in the audience imagine themselves as that character? And I think they can, and I think the overwhelming success of the movie is proof that the men in the audience were able to look at her and say, I can see myself in her position. But also, there are so many interesting points made about the relationship between women and their male superiors where they work and their co-workers. I mean, the movie is about Clarice. It's not about Hannibal Lecter, and it's not about Buffalo Bill. Hannibal Lecter, you could argue, if it wasn't for the extraordinary flamboyance of Anthony Hopkins' performance, he probably wouldn't have attracted any more attention in this than he did in Manhunter. Whereas another excellent actor, what's his name?
Cox.
Brian Cox.
Yeah, there you go.
Cox.
Yeah.
Another excellent actor, but because the director chose not to emphasize that character and not to try to get the maximum dramatic effect from those scenes, that went by hardly without anybody noticing. As a matter of fact, most people who have seen Manhunter years ago, they probably don't even remember that Hannibal Lecter is in it. But the Jodie Foster in this, I feel a connection to her very strongly, because, and I think anybody who's ever gone into a situation where they're not completely sure of themselves and they're not completely sure that they're going to be accepted can certainly empathize with her. And as far as her voice, well, I have to admit, I didn't notice it at all. I mean, this movie is a horror movie, and it has a grand guignol sensibility. It's not meant to be taken seriously as a documentary or as a serious exploration of serial killers. And that's probably one of the reasons why this trans issue stands out as being the most serious flaw in the film and in the book. They didn't need to do that. And they should have learned the experience from the experience of the cruising film, which was just a few years earlier. These are not stupid or insensitive people. Jodie Foster certainly should have been aware of what the problem would be. Jonathan Demme certainly should have been aware. They keep the dialogue from the book in the movie where it's emphasized he's not really a transsexual. That doesn't work. A modern understanding of what a transsexual is anybody who feels that they are a transsexual is a transsexual. Anybody who identifies as a transsexual is a transsexual. The idea that you could say, well, the guy went to Johns Hopkins and they turned him down for a sex change operation, so he's not really a transsexual. And they go so far as to say he's not really gay. I don't know how anybody can make a determination like that. And the character is supposed to have had a relationship with the guy that was the patient of Hannibal Lecter. It gets complicated because they changed it from the book to the movie. But the bottom line is either the patient of Hannibal Lecter, the past patient of Hannibal Lecter, had a relationship with James Gumb, or the guy whose head ends up in the jar had a relationship with him. But it was a man-on-man action there. That was a gay relationship. So how you can say he's not really gay and he's not really trans to try to head off criticism, and at the same time you present them wearing mascara and putting on lipstick and dancing around, doing a shimmy and doing all that business about putting on moisturizer and having a poodle. I mean, it screams stereotypical queen.
Well, like I was saying, that character is loosely based on it. Ed Gein didn't do all that stuff, but he did wear women's skin and dance in the moonlight.
But the one thing that they took out of the book, out of the movie that was in the book, was that Jane Gumb wants to be his mother. He's watching in the book. He's watching old films of his mother at a beauty pageant. His desire is similar to Ed Gein's desire. Yeah. He wants to be in mommy's skin.
Mm-hmm. And that was probably lifted out because the similarities to Psycho.
Exactly right. Yes. And that was a mistake, I think, because they inevitably end up presenting him as a person who is trans, who wants to have a sex change operation and has had it denied. What would we call somebody like that in the modern parlance? What would we refer to him as?
It's also, we're also talking about the 90s.
Yes.
You know, but that's the thing. We understand a little bit more now than we did in 1990. When did this come out, guys? Like
91.
91. Wow. So, I mean, really,
it's really an 80s movie.
So, and I don't know, when was the book written? I mean, even probably further than that, a little bit.
Several years before.
So there was no understanding. So go ahead.
There is that cultural, social mirror aspect to art wherein, we look into the work and we see the needs, the fears, the happiness, everything that is of the time in which it was made. And then 10 years later, you might look at it and it says something completely different. 10 years from there, it says something else altogether. And, we have the benefit of hindsight. I've been introducing my son to The Simpsons on Disney Plus, and there are plenty of culturally insensitive things in those, even up till the past couple of years, in quite a few of the characters or situations, jokes made at the expense of, various types of cultures or what have you. And, I have to sort of explain to him that's not funny anymore. And that once upon a time it was funny. Hindsight allows us to recognize how even in the, not so distant past, we thought a lot of things like making gay jokes could be funny, treating, the trans issue the way this film does, or that Jodie Foster has a great body of work.
Well, one of the things,
I do just want to circle back around to that just 1 second. I didn't say she was a bad actor. Not at all. I don't think she's a bad actor. I think she gives a great performance in this. It's just her range is limited, in my opinion, that she's doing a great job being Jodie Foster in this situation, not so much Clarice Starling.
well, as somebody who likes this movie very much and is very impressed with the storytelling, I have to admit that the problem I have as far as the trans issue is that it cannot be excused in the way you have described. You can't say, oh, they didn't understand back then. To a certain extent, maybe. To a certain extent, we could say that our understanding of what it means to be trans has increased enormously. More people have a greater understanding of what transsexuality is about than they did back when Thomas Harris was writing the book. And to give Thomas Harris a little bit of credit, he put a lot of stuff in the book. A conversation between Jack Crawford and the head of the surgery department, folks that do the sex change operations at John Hopkins. I'm mispronouncing my own name. And those conversations are back and forth about how violent, whether or not it's worth looking through the people that have been rejected for sex change operations, because it's unlikely that the victim, that the perpetrator would be among them, and also their privacy concerns. So Thomas Harris did in those conversations try to make it clear that he wasn't saying that this guy was a transsexual. I don't think it really works, but I'll give him credit for trying at least. But when they came to make the film, even if we forget about the trans question, even if we just talk about depicting gay people, how could anybody involved with this project have thought that this was a positive image of gay men? A guy with a wig made from a woman's scalp on his head, mascara, lipstick, dancing around with a poodle, saying, put the moisturizer on or you'll get the hose, or whatever the famous line is.
Yeah.
That is it makes me cringe every time I see it. And I'm not knocking the performer, because the actor is a terrific actor, as far as I can see, did a terrific job. And I'm not saying they didn't create an indelible moment. I mean, it certainly is memorable. It's just, I can't understand how they could think that that would be okay, even then. And so it was criticized even then. At the Oscars, it was a gay rights group that was criticizing them and protesting them at the Oscars.
That's another part of the disconnect I have with the film. And that is that if, everyone remembers and talks about Hannibal Lecter because of, the performance that Hopkins gave. And it was, he was chewing the scenery. There was nothing left when he was done. But, the main adversary, I would think, is Buffalo Bill. Even though Lecter is sort of, playing the game behind the scenes and all of that, it's Buffalo Bill. And this is a character that, as you said, from the time the film was released, there was a lot of negative reception to the character, but there was also a lot of parody of the character. Right. He's this really backwards interpretation of what that lifestyle is. Because I disagree with you. I think this is a movie that's absolutely meant to be taken seriously. Too seriously, I think. And Buffalo Bill is supposed to be scary, based on that flamboyant sort of personality. But it's goofy. It's
to that extent. What I meant was, I didn't mean to say that it was not meant to be taken seriously. It's meant to be an effective thriller, but it's a horror movie, and all the parts have been put together to make it as disturbing and as thrilling as possible. But it isn't meant to be taken seriously as an examination of serial killers or crime procedures to find serial killers. All of that stuff, like for instance, taking bits and pieces from different serial killers creates the impression that serial killers are this sort of are routinely going out and skinning people to get their hides for different reasons. Most of the serial killer cases you look at, the cases are horrible and tragic, but they're very mundane things. They kill people and they find ways of disposing the bodies.
Yes, but do the audiences of that time know that? That's the thing.
I think that Thomas Harris, as a master storyteller, and I have to say, I can't imagine anybody picking up that book and putting it down. I went through that in a day. It's a terrific read, and he's a master of that type of story. But he's also a guy who used to be a crime reporter. He used to be a guy who followed cops around and got information to report on crimes. And so he's always looking for these little exciting details, these little lurid details. It must have appealed to him when he came upon that thing about Ed Gein dancing around in skins of women. It must have said, okay, well, that goes in. The business about the moths really doesn't really make much sense. It doesn't really have any great meaning in the movie. I always felt that serial killers are not self-aware enough to be able to do something like that, which is a sort of statement about what he's trying to achieve, right? He puts the chrysalis down the throats of his victims because the chrysalis represents transformation, and he's trying to transform himself. Well, that seems a little poetic for a serial killer. Anybody who is dumb enough to think that he can take the skins off women, stitch it together, and have a decent looking body that he can slip into is not going to be smart enough to think, I'll leave this little thing behind, this little memento to show people what I'm trying to do. And of course, it also raises the question, why does he want anybody to know what he's doing?
Well, there are a lot of stupid people out there who are more. There's more stupid out there than there is intelligence. I think 2020 taught us a lot about face masks and how intelligent people really are.
Well, the way we're talking about the character of Buffalo Bill now, it almost sounds like we're saying that Thomas Harris said, "I need to create this villain." What's more scarier than a gay trans person? Do you think that's what he was going for, or what he purposely was trying to do?
I think, and this is. William's right. There's different types of killers. And I think what they did with these is they mixed them. Because you
that's what he did. Yeah.
You have the Ted Bundy element of Buffalo Bill acting like he's injured and he knocks women over the head and takes them back to his lair. Then you have the Ed Gein, of course, with the skin and all that. And you know, as far as do serial killers want to get caught? Yes, they don't want to get caught, but what they are doing is they're playing a game. Like, I am smarter than you. I dare you to find me. And anything I've ever watched, they leave stuff behind on purpose or they either take something or they leave something. That's what they always say.
Wouldn't you say, though, that would be true of a serial killer who doesn't have a larger project? I mean, what they're giving James Demme, they're giving him a project that he wants to accomplish.
Yeah, that's the thing. They're mixing him. That's what I'm saying. They're mixing him. Yeah.
Within the logic of this character, why would he, when he has this project in mind, why would he be saying, well, while I'm working on this, I'll also be leaving these little pointless clues to help them to stop me?
No,
there's nothing in his personality that suggests he wants to be stopped. There are serial killers like that. I don't question that. I mean, it's kind of a famous thing, right? Writing on the mirror, stop me before I kill again.
And really, I don't, some of them, they don't write anything. I mean, the only thing that I've ever seen was, of course, the Manson family. What they did, they wrote on the walls and all that to do a misleading kind of thing. But any other, like, you know, I hate to call them famous. They're monsters, okay?
Infamous, yes.
And they're infamous. There you go. And they took all these elements from these guys and they mixed them with these characters. Because Hannibal Lecter is, you know, I mean, he's cannibal. So there has been cannibalistic serial killers in the past. Of course, Jeffrey Dahmer being the most infamous of them all. And then, you know, that is kind of weird to me that, you know, serial killers are smart, but I mean, Dr. Lecter. I mean, I've
Well,
seen doctors, but they hide under the guise of being a doctor. They're not
that's another.
serving meat up.
Oh, that's
people.
another example of how
Yeah.
I think that he was primarily interested in maximizing the thrills. He
Yeah.
wasn't trying to
That's all
create
it
a realistic portrayal of a serial killer, because he must have realized from his research that serial killers generally, and don't get on me, guys, you serial killers out there, but serial killers generally are pretty, mediocre people. They're not great geniuses. It's always interesting when they talk about
some of
who's
them
the
are.
guy. Ted Bundy was supposed to be very smart, and they talk about their IQs.
He wasn't smart. He was more charismatic than
Okay, well,
anything.
but some of them we
No,
see
but you're
that they
right.
say
They
that
said he was real smart, but he was charismatic. He was a master bullshitter.
But most
Because
of them
that's what
are.
all these are.
The guy that Thomas Harris based this on, apparently the person that inspired him, was a doctor that he interviewed when I think he was down in Mexico. It was a doctor who was in prison for committing a series of murders. And he came to be known in the local press as the werewolf of whatever town he was in. And he spoke to him just for a brief period of time. And he realized how intelligent he was. And I guess it got the thought going in his head that just because you're a serial killer doesn't mean you have to be some sort of drooling maniac. But even that guy's murders are fairly, I mean, they're murders, they're horrible in that sense. He picked people up in his car, I guess, and then after he killed them, he would chop them up somehow, or cut them up and throw the body parts out the window as he was driving along. But that's what you see through most of the serial killers. They're not really creative people. They're not looking to do really massive projects that are going to require a lot of time and a lot of effort. And I can't understand. I understand why they have the business in the book about how he buries the first girl that he kills with a weight. So she stays down longer. It takes longer for them to discover. By the time they discover her, they've already found two more that he killed, and he didn't weight down. And at a certain point in the story, Jodie Foster figures out that the reason he did that is because the first girl he killed was right where he lived. And he's a clever fellow, and he realized that rule number one for serial killers is you don't kill people that you're connected to, because that brings the police to your door. So he came up with this idea of weighting the body down so it'll remain hidden until the other two, who were in other towns, people he wouldn't have had any contact with, until their bodies are discovered. And then the police would be looking at the picture as a whole, and they would think, well, they're just random drops of bodies in different places. So that makes sense. But then we have to ask ourselves, why doesn't he dispose of the bodies completely? Why doesn't he make sure that none of them are ever discovered? Surely a guy who has all the elaborate equipment that he has for tanning bodies and whatnot,
Yeah.
surely he could find a way. It looks like he's got one corpse in the bathtub that's pretty thoroughly melted away. Why isn't he doing that to all the bodies? And why would he be doing things like leaving the blouse after he slits the blouse of the senator's daughter? As he's driving away, or as he's getting back into his van, he throws the blouse in the parking lot. Why would he do that?
Yeah.
I mean, I understand why it's necessary for the plot. I just don't understand what his motivation as a serial killer who doesn't want to be caught. Why would he do that?
It goes again. They just a mixture of stuff. That's all it was.
By taking all these pieces and putting them together, he's created this sort of effective monster for the movies, but he hasn't really created a very accurate picture of what the average serial killer is like.
So if the Buffalo Bill character doesn't work, doesn't really function in the story in a logical way, is that not a huge ding against the film?
Not so much, because I mean, I'm in a quandary because I love the movie, but I see this big problem with the treatment of the trans character. As far as the problems with the plot mechanics, there isn't a thriller that's ever been devised that is perfectly logical. The author is always asking you to accept certain things. Another example, how many times would the head of behavioral sciences at the FBI reach down into the student body and say, let me take this young woman who hasn't passed her tests yet, and let me put her into this dangerous and important case, right?
Yeah.
But if they didn't do that, then all the richness of the story, all the most involving aspect of the story would be lost. So it's an unlikely thing. It's not impossible. It's unlikely, but I'm glad he did it. I'm glad he took that risk. I'm glad he said to himself, I can go that far. You know, I'll bend the rules that much.
I disagree, because I feel like the writer can always find a better way to solve those problems. I mean, you write a script and you look at it and you go, oh, this thing doesn't make logical sense. Maybe it makes emotional sense. Maybe it moves the plot along, like you're saying. But isn't there just then the opportunity to solve that problem and say, hey, you know, what other ways could I possibly, you know, achieve the same story arc just by modifying a few details?
The book has Jack Crawford's wife dying. He's taking care of her as the story goes on, and she dies before the end of the story. She's got cancer or something. And you can imagine that in Jack Crawford's eyes, he's sort of passing the torch. He sees something in Clarice that is similar to his wife. And so he's helping her and giving her a leg up as a way of sort of thanking or remembering his wife, saying, I want to help this obviously talented, intelligent person to move up and to achieve great things. And as it turns out in the story, boy, he picked a winner, because he went off to find an empty house, and she went off and found the guy that was committing the crimes. And not only does she find him, she actually ends up killing him and saving the girl that was in his control. So she is a true hero. And I think it's inspiring, not just to women, but to anybody, to say, if you're dedicated, if you're pure of heart, if you're not greedy or cynical, like Dr. Chilton is, then you can achieve great things. And you can also silence the lambs, right? That's the, I mean, in a way you could say that this movie and the book benefit from sort of artistic trappings that have been laid on top of it. The business about the death's head moth, and the business about the story with the lambs being killed and trying to silence the sound of the lambs. All of that stuff makes the movie and the book feel like they have greater gravity and greater depth. And I admit that's just layering stuff on. But the book was supposed to be a thriller. It was supposed to be something that you read and enjoy and move on to something else. It wasn't supposed to be a life-changing thing. I still think that Thomas Harris probably was motivated to write that character, the Buffalo Bill character, because he was doing what you were describing before, Eric. He was looking for the most scintillating or salacious things that he could bring to people's attention. When I write a story, that's the first thing that occurs to me. What are the topics that are going to get people upset? What are the things that are going to make people anxious? Sexuality and things like that always make people nervous, right? Certainly serial killers make people nervous. So you can bring all those elements together, you're bound to have something that's going to be dynamite. And when they bought the book and they wanted to make it into a movie, even if they were aware of the movie's long history of mistreating gay characters, they still might have said, gee, we bought this book and that's such an intrinsic part of the book. We can't really throw it away. What else would we have? You know, it's just going to be a routine serial killer who kills people and disposes of their body. We have to have that other element to give it that sort of lurid attraction, that sort of shocking aspect that, you know, when the movie came out, it was considered fairly shocking. And I know the audience I saw it with in the theater when it was released, they were on the edge of their seat. They found it very shocking. And you know, I see reviews now, I guess it's the new generation of folks who say, oh, it's boring. That's boring. I mean, it seems to me it moves like a shot right from the first frame. The movie seems to be done by people who are saying, we got so much to get to, we're going to hurry through everything. We don't stop for anything. The only time they slow down is when they have those conversations between Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins, and I think that they're wise to, because those are great moments. But
yeah, I think you could have replaced the Buffalo Bill character with any mundane serial killer, because to me the story is Lecter and Clarice. I think they're the main story. The Buffalo Bill, that's just that's just their side story. That's what they're working on.
But isn't
So,
the idea?
so I think you could have had any other.
Isn't the
character
idea
there.
that this is Sherlock Holmes and Watson consulting on a case? The only difference is if Watson gets too close to Sherlock Holmes, he eats his face off.
Yeah.
Psychopathic Sherlock Holmes who takes Watson
Yeah.
through the case and tells him how to solve it. I mean, that to me, when I saw the film the first time, I thought, oh, that's brilliant, right? Because the energy that they created when they keep telling Jodie Foster, there's that big buildup, don't go near the glass. Make sure you don't go near the glass. Don't take anything from him. And it really creates the impression that this guy's going to, if you get too close to him, he's just going to gnaw your face off. And that really is palpable, at least the first time I saw it. I don't know how much. I mean, that's the problem with horror movies. After a while, they lose their effect.
Yeah.
You see them too often.
Well, I never understood. Oh, go ahead, Carey. Sorry.
I was going to ask Erik. I just want to know what his thoughts were on Manhunter, Hannibal, the Red Dragon, and then the TV show. If he thought, if he thought those were better properties than Silence of the Lambs.
I don't know. I mean, I've never been able to connect with any of them. The Hannibal Lecter character isn't particularly, for me, from my sensibilities, isn't particularly scary or compelling. I remember liking Manhunter when I saw it. Silence of the Lambs, I didn't get. And then I thought Hannibal was ridiculous. And
yes,
the Red Dragon remake, it's like, hey, let's get, Ratner to do this. So yeah, it was, none of the films in the franchise really worked for me. And I've given some possible reasons why. It doesn't all, sort of land on Jodie Foster's accent. But I love Julianne Moore. And so having her in Hannibal was an improvement for my money. I think she's just a more versatile actor. But yeah, I can't really connect with any of it.
See, I should be upset of her accent because the character's from West Virginia and we don't sound like that.
You don't realize if you sound like that. I know I don't realize I sound like what I sound like.
Yeah, a couple of locations in the movie are actually like one county over from where I live, where they found the bodies at.
It may always be wise in Hollywood films for American actors to avoid doing accents of any kind, even of other Americans. But it was such an important part of the character. I mean, Hannibal has to be able to dig into her, that she's a rube, as he calls her. That she's, he's getting at her because of her background, and he touches on that a raw spot. She is aware of that as a possible weakness, or what might be perceived as a possible weakness, that she's not a sophisticated person, she doesn't come from a wealthy family, all those kinds of things. But I didn't like Hannibal. I thought Hannibal was, Ridley Scott is good when he has a good script. And when he doesn't have a good script, then there's no accounting for him. And Hannibal was beautifully shot, but the story is not worth anybody's time, in my opinion.
Yeah, Hannibal felt like the Hollywood.
Yes, but the movies that followed proves that you probably do need this certain arrangement of elements that Silence of the Lambs had in order for it to work. Now, I hear people say that they think the TV series Hannibal is a very good show. I've never seen it.
Oh, it is. I'm sorry. Yeah, Hannibal, the first season was excellent, and I wish they would have kept going with it. I think it went to 3 seasons because the second season was cool as well. Third season, they kind of lost me a little bit, but I think it had potential, but I mean, it's never going to happen.
But now they have a new show
It's great.
Now they got
Yeah,
they got the show
Clarice.
Clarice. Yeah.
And
Oh well, it's canceled now.
Oh, okay.
I just read that today.
Those shows may have an advantage in that they're not telling a single story, right? They don't need a beginning, middle, and an end the way a Hollywood thriller needs to. You know, need to get all that in 2.5 hours or whatever the running time of Silence of the Lambs was. They can tell all sorts of different stories, and they just have to include one of those characters. So they can do all sorts of things, and one week maybe it'll be great, one week maybe it'll stink, but it doesn't really make sense to try to compare them to this, because here they're trying to do a specific thing. They had a particular story, and they, you know, I think they handled it in a very precise and effective way. And I was surprised when I watched it a day or so ago that still I still found it very effective. I think one of the scenes that I always found effective is the scene when she's doing the first autopsy.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very powerful scene. I remember when I saw that in the theaters, we weren't used to seeing things like that. Now, in the years since, X-Files and CSI and all those other shows have done that sort of scene to death. But that scene in that film seemed to me to be unusual in its explicitness, even though it really isn't explicit. I mean, it doesn't show you too much.
Yeah.
But it's more explicit than films had been prior to that. And it has a tremendous emotional weight, because you feel all the people present feel tremendous sympathy for this person that's been killed. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like a cleansing ritual. It has a feeling that I think the X-Files had, and he got it from Silence of the Lambs, because the X-Files is basically Silence of the Lambs done every week with supernatural elements. But the idea of you present the real world, you have some sort of event or individual that creates chaos, and then the adults come onto the scene and they create order out of chaos. And by going through that process, they have that body in front of them, which has been all destroyed by a crazy person, and they're trying to assert logic and rationality. They're trying to put some order into it. And that's something that's very powerful for the audience. They want to see that. They don't want to be left with a dead body that's all cut up for reasons that nobody can really understand. They want somebody to come along and say, this is why he did it, this is how he did it, and this is where we can find him and stop him. And then you can relax, then you can go home. Then you don't hear the lambs anymore.
Okay, Starling.
Bill. Star-shaped contact entrance wound over the sternum. Muzzle stamp at the top.
Wrongful death.
Wrongful death.
She'll have to go to the state pathologist at Claxton. Well, I better get back to that service. Lamar will help you. Lord Almighty. What else do you see, Starling?
Well, he's not local. Her ears are pierced 3 times, and there's a glitter nail polish. It looks like town to me.
But that scene, I think, is very powerful. And there are a number of scenes in the movie that have that sort of power.
I had a question. Like, I was watching it, and I'm like, okay, they have him down in a dungeon type thing. There's all these crazies around him in cells. They're walking her down, and he has this big old plexiglass looking thing and a drawer and all that. I mean, they really built it up on this guy, and it's like, why would you? First off, why wouldn't he be by himself? Why would he be down there where he can mess with people, where he made that guy swallow his own tongue? You know,
well, how likely is it that anybody would ever think that somebody could do that? Right?
Yeah.
So I
mean, there are crazy people, and I don't know, maybe it did happen, but what I'm saying is, if he's like the most dangerous son of a gun on planet Earth, why not have him in something by himself, kind of like what they did with Magneto and X-Men? Like he's just like a suspended type thing, and then a little drop, a little bridge comes out, because he can't escape. If he tries to, he'll fall to his death. But why put him in there with people that are already
well, you're assuming
they don't have their wits about them. I'm trying to say it a better way than just
the guys
crazy.
around him may be just as bad as he is.
Yeah, but he's more of a manipulator. We get to see the evil side of him, of course, but yeah, those other guys, they're just, they're throwing semen at Clarice when she's walking down the hallway. They're yelling at her, and then she comes around the corner, and there he is. It's classical music, and he's just like, he's just in a cell. He reminds me of a shark. He just looks peaceful, but he'll rip your head off.
One area where his research, Thomas Harris's research, might have paid off is that he realized that individuals who run these institutions have a certain amount of leeway. And that may be true. I mean, if you look at the Jeffrey Epstein case, you might say, how did that ever happen? It happened because one person at the top, right, somebody was running that institution who either allowed it to happen accidentally or made sure that it happened.
Yeah.
It does surprise us to hear that such things can go on. But when you think about it, Hannibal Lecter and all these other prisoners have to be kept under watch 24 hours a day for the rest of their lives. So maybe the idea of setting up a special facility just for Hannibal Lecter isn't appealing, especially when they look at their budget. Right?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm just saying, for the movie's sake.
For the movie's sake, they obviously
realistically, of course, they're not. But have him in his own kind of like he's a little bit further away from people. He's in kind of like a solitary type deal.
Man, guys, for a movie that everybody here loves so much,
we're picking it apart. Yeah,
picking apart all the logic.
I love the movie, and I like the story. It's a movie.
Well,
I'm gonna pick at it a little bit.
One of the things that occurred to me when Clarice first comes in and she sees him standing there is the scene in the 1931 Dracula, which incidentally was also released on Valentine's Day in 1931. so was Silence of the Lambs. And when he's standing there, I flashed on Bela Lugosi standing on the stairs. That is the vein that they were mining. It's a horror movie. So I don't believe that there's actually vampires living in Transylvania. But I can enjoy a story about that if it's done in an imaginative way.
And I just feel like if we're, looking at this film and saying, well, it's just a horror movie, so stuff doesn't have to all make sense. I mean, I feel this film is, the way I always viewed Silence of the Lambs was that it was elevated horror. It was, this is not the movie the teenagers are going to go see. This is what adults are going to go see. And the kids will come too, because there's some gore and stuff like that. But, this is something for people who think they are above horror films to go and see. And part of, it being above the rest of its, specific genre is the fact that it is, at least on a surface level, saying, we are addressing these, sort of more, this isn't Freddy Krueger. These are real world sort of situations that are happening. And, profiler background and, behavioral units and all that stuff. We've got all this input from, professionals in the field who are advising on the technicalities involved with the filmmaking.
But that's something that William Friedkin and William Peter Blatty also said about The Exorcist, right? They had all this advice from priests and experts in exorcism. And that movie also sort of eschewed the title of horror movie. William Friedkin didn't want it to be considered a horror movie. He also felt it should be above horror as a genre. It should be something for thinking people. And he achieved that. But it seems to me if you can accept the absurdities of Exorcist or The Exorcist 3, then it shouldn't be too hard to accept the implausibilities of Silence of the Lambs, because there's nothing in the movie that really you could say that never happened or never could happen. It's just a question of how likely it is that they would happen.
Well, I mean, I'm all for trying to raise the bar and make better films in all genres. I think we do a disservice to horror by, sort of, giving it a pass like the overweight kid, in gym or whatever, by saying, oh, well, it's just horror. So,
Well, that's not what I'm trying to say at all.
But, The Exorcist, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. And I'm not a Catholic. I'm a practicing atheist. And yet I'm able to watch that film the same way I can watch anything else that is fantasy. It's not real. It didn't happen. But does it have its own sort of internal consistency and logic? And, when we start having too many coincidences, or you have to sort of like go to the book in order to find the connective tissue between certain things. And, it's.
I don't feel that that's the case with the film. I had no trouble understanding the plot, and I don't think anybody in the audience that I saw it with had any difficulty. If they did, then the ending would have been, worthless. You have to build up suspense by having the audience with you every step of the way. My objections to certain things like the way the character of Buffalo Bill is portrayed have to do with probably a feeling that, well, let me give you my feeling about Thomas Harris. It's almost impossible to find an interview with him. Certainly nothing on video. I found one from just a couple of years ago. And he looks like he's a heavy-set man with a gray beard and suspenders. And he looks like somebody that you might see in a Norman Rockwell painting. He probably doesn't have much connection to the world of gay men or transsexuals, and yet he might be intrigued by these ideas. And so if he went to his publisher and said, I want to do a story about transsexual, they'd say, please, don't bother us. But if he works that stuff into a thriller, then maybe he can get away with delving into these things and discussing these things. Otherwise, he might have thought he was doing something progressive. It didn't turn out that way. But I don't get the impression that he was intentionally trying to make something that would be used to disparage transsexual people. That's my biggest problem with the movie. But I think it's a mistake to say, well, I don't like this aspect of the thing. I think they dropped the ball on that. So the whole movie stinks. It's all bad. And I see that in some of the reviews on Letterboxd, which is a better place to look for thoughtful reviews than the IMDb, I think. And there was one review from a very intelligent person, identified herself as a trans woman, and went on quite long why she hates the portrayal of trans people in the film. But she loses me a little bit at the end when she says, it's a terrible movie. It doesn't make any sense. It's not well made. The acting stinks. So, no. If that were true, we wouldn't be talking about it and you wouldn't care about it. It's because it was so effective, so powerful. That's why it's harmful. That's why that portrayal matters.
But
it's easier if you're somebody who doesn't like the movie at all. So Eric, you're in a good position. You don't have to ponder these things at all. You can dismiss it and move on to something else. But for people who do like the movie, it is a tough spot to be in. And in my mind, it is similar to the situation with The Exorcist, where the message that the guy who wrote it is trying to put across is offensive to me. His project there is to try to resurrect the devil as a boogeyman that people should fear. I think that's a bad thing to do. I think that's, it's harmful to society. I think it has proved to be harmful. But I can't say I dislike the movie because I thought it was terrific. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what to say,
Yeah, there's a lot of, like, when you look at older movies that done stuff, and then at the time you didn't, when I first saw the movie, I wasn't thinking, oh, they shouldn't have made that a gay character because that makes all gay people look bad or whatever. But there's all bunch of movies that you can go back and be like, oh man, that's it seemed fine at the time, but now you watch it and you're just like with you're talking about with The Simpsons,
I do want to bring up the ending. Okay, I didn't the ending when he gets away and he's like, I'm going to have an old friend for dinner. I don't know, why would he follow him just to, I know he didn't like him. I just don't get that part of it. I don't get him going and going after the psychiatrist.
Well, what else?
Of course, he couldn't go to McDonald's and like, do you want a Big Mac, or like.
Well,
couldn't.
Shelton is obviously concerned that Hannibal Lecter is going to come after him. That's why he's down there in Jamaica.
Yeah.
So obviously he fears that. I have to admit, to add to Erik's argument, I have another criticism. I don't think that the performance by the guy playing Chilton was a good one. I think that there are times when he approached caricature. It's a little too much.
Well, that actor, he always plays an asshole, doesn't he?
I know, but they really laid it on too much here. I mean, they wanted to create a character that you wouldn't have any sympathy at all for, so that when Hannibal Lecter is seen going after him at the end of the film, you would smile and think, justice will be done.
Now he's going to get eaten.
But
I've got something else I think Erik will also disagree on here. I guess the American Film Institute, they listed him as the #1 villain out of 100 list of villains, and I got to disagree with that also. I don't think he would be number one.
Would they list?
Hannibal Lecter.
Huh.
#1 villain.
Who would you pick?
Who would I have picked?
Oh, man.
See, I always think those lists are kind of...
Yeah, they're funny.
Not Hannibal Lecter. I don't know. I liked the character of Hannibal Lecter. I thought Anthony Hopkins done a good job, but I think... I don't know. Erik, what do you think? What do you think about him being the
Erik, we're going to
one?
throw you under the bus. What do you think?
He's not #1, particularly if we're trying to view it through, this film, because he doesn't have enough to do that's diabolical to give him that sort of credit, I think. I mean, it's not to say that he doesn't do awful things, but the consequences of his actions are not far reaching enough, in my opinion. It's hard to say who the #1 villain would be. I'd probably say Darth Vader.
That's what I was thinking, but
he's just so iconic, and he has so many boxes that are ticked in terms of what makes him a great villain, whether that is, going across the spectrum from, humanity to inhumanity. But Hannibal Lecter, no. I think
I'm trying to think of what does everybody like about the character, and I'm thinking it was just the Anthony Hopkins portrayal. I mean, right? I mean, there's nothing.
Well, yeah, because Brian. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think possibly this is another instance where there's a similarity to Dracula. What people admire about him is that they are told that he's a very, very dangerous person. But when they meet him, he's very nice. He's very polite. And the one thing that, as far as he's concerned, that's unforgivable is rudeness. That's kind of charming in a way, You can't help but look at a guy like that in a different light when you realize that he actually is playing by some sort of rules. He isn't just a madman running around, killing people. And the fact that they're able, without showing him until later in the film, actually killing people, the fact that they're still able to make the character seem very sinister just by suggesting what he might be capable of, that's pretty effective, I think. I think that's pretty clever filmmaking. I mean, they don't even show you the picture of the nurse that Chilton gives to Clarice when he's trying to tell her, look out for this guy. This is what he did to the nurse, shortly before.
Yeah, but I mean, I still think it's just I think it's Anthony Hopkins that makes I don't think
he understood the character. He understood what was necessary.
But to go back to to go back to the Chilton thing too, I think if there's sort of a fan theory that I guess maybe Chilton was maybe torturing Lecter.
He was torturing him by playing.
And then there's
the evangelical TV show.
Yeah, but with the whole with the fava beans and Chianti, someone had
Yeah.
said that in real life that you wouldn't put those two things together, and he was telling Clarice that so that she would know that he was kind of hinting that he's off his medication, because she would know that he would never put those two things together because he is
Well, in the book, he doesn't have those two things together. He has
right, yeah.
different things.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
That seems iconic. And then with the Buffalo Bill, I mean, I know that character. I mean, I know people nowadays, he became like an internet meme, you know what I'm saying, with the lotion and all that, but I don't know. I feel like he wasn't as popular when the movie came out as he is now.
He's sort of grown in popularity. Yeah.
I did
thought
want
he
to
was-
give. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I feel like that was what everyone was talking about. So
Pretty much.
I mean, I thought that he was pretty strongly regarded right out of the gate. It was Brian Cox as Hannibal Lecter who didn't really, make much of a cultural audience impression.
Right.
It would have been interesting to see how Brian Cox handled the film, this film. But I have a feeling that there's something about Anthony Hopkins that is always on the line between melodramatic histrionics, sort of being over the top, and at the same time he has an intensity, a sort of constant stare that makes it believable, makes it credible. Like a lot of British actors, and this is why they always go to them to play like superhero characters or fantasy characters, they have a way of making these far-fetched characters seem real. American actor probably would not have been able to play that character as effectively. And I don't know if Anthony Hopkins ever had Bela Lugosi in mind, but I think Bela Lugosi is a similar figure in film history. He's somebody that's sort of regarded as a ham, but when you actually watch his best performances, you see he is right on the mark. He's creating something iconic. It has to be a little larger than life in order for it to be memorable and to be effective.
Right. Well, I think Ted Levine is the one that doesn't get enough credit.
The Buffalo Bill actor.
Yeah, the actor.
No
one talks about Ted Levine. They always talk about Buffalo Bill. And then ever since then, he's been typecast as he plays a cop and everything now.
Do we have any sign that he's unhappy with his situation?
Oh no, I mean, he was on that hit TV show Monk as the
police chief.
Yeah, the police chief.
Oh,
so
man.
He's had a good career. Yeah, he's not done. He's done very well.
Another thing that's unusual is that the woman in the pit, I forget the name of the actress, if you guys have it there. Senator Martin's daughter, I think it's Senator Martin. She's portrayed unusually as not being passive just because she's in a pit. Now, I have to admit, if I found myself in her situation, I'd be, sitting on the floor crying. I wouldn't be trying to lure the poodle down into the pit. The fact that she's so proactive in doing something in her own defense is a departure from the way characters like that were portrayed in films in the past. And the fact that she's a cusser. I mean, get me out of here, you bitch.
Yeah.
She doesn't even mind cussing out the person that's coming to rescue her.
The actress is Brooke Smith.
And she still has a career.
Yeah, she's on.
Yeah, I've seen her on
Grey's
Law and
Anatomy.
Order
Yeah, Bates Motel. Yeah, so she's been on a lot.
Yeah. So
she's been on a lot of TV shows.
So they benefited from this film.
Yeah, a lot of them did.
Obviously, Anthony Hopkins did. I guess this was
I don't really know. What else has he done? No, I'm
Oh,
Transformers, Dark Side of the Moon.
Transformers.
yeah.
He went out to Transformers after this.
I wanted to give my number one villain. I was sitting here thinking about number one villains, and I'm going to pick mine, and it's Beethoven. That damn Saint Bernard. Those people took him in, and all he did was destroy shit.
Well,
he messed up the house. He almost gave James Gordon a heart attack. Well, rest in peace. I'm sorry, he is dead now. But no. During the movie, I see the dad always and the dogs just run. That's my number one villain.
And that film, has fewer plot holes and leaps in logic than Silence of the Lambs.
I'm just glad we got a movie on here that not everybody agrees on. I think that
Well,
makes
look
it
at the great controversy.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of faults with it, of course, but I don't know. I think I enjoy it for the grittiness of it. I do think it was well shot, and yeah, the characters are, some of them are far-fetched, and yes, like I've said, things are mixed up to make the characters a little bit more, wow, like, oh my God, he's a psychiatrist, he's a cannibal, he sliced up a freaking security guard and hung him up in a cell like a drape, and he escapes by using their face to get in the ambulance. Of course, he's not going to be all those things. You're either one thing or another. You're not going to, all this stuff is to the 100% extreme. And I agree with William, they did a lot of it for shock value.
It's on an operatic level.
Yeah,
it's
pretty
almost
much.
like a fantasy about serial killers and the people that catch them. One interesting thing is that the 70s and 80s appear to have been a peak period for serial killers. And the good news is that serial killers in the United States have dropped considerably in recent years. The downside of that news is that 40% of killings in the United States go unsolved. So it may be that we just have smarter serial killers that are hiding their involvement. Maybe they're not doing things like leaving blouses at the scene of the crime, or putting cocoons down people's throats. But that's an encouraging thing, I think. The question of whether this story actually has somebody who is an expert in behavioral science or in profiling solving the crime on those terms is another question. You could say that a person who has a reasonably good brain, given the same information, would have followed the same line to the killer that Clarice follows. You know what I mean? It's not like by being a profiler and having some special understanding of how serial killers work that she arrived at the culprit. She followed the clues, just like criminal investigators have always been doing. Certain amount of insight into the character, into the person, is sort of common sense. Like, for instance, they say serial killers don't go outside their group generally. They don't want to be noticed. So if it's a white guy hanging around with a lot of black people, he's going to stand out, and that's going to make it easier for him to be found. So they generally tend to hunt within their own group. That's sort of common sense, right? You don't need an expert to tell you that probably the serial killer is a white male of a certain age, because almost all the serial killers that have in recorded history have been white males of a certain age, at least in this country.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, again, it's an exaggeration and a sort of fantasy view of crime investigation, serial investigation. They want to get that FBI approval, stamp of approval. So they say we had consultants and it's based on actual cases and all that. But really the idea is to create a thrilling story.
Another good thing coming out of this movie was Goodbye Horses, an awesome song that I discovered through this movie. Didn't realize it was sung by a black woman at the time, right, but yeah. Mm-hmm. You just don't know. But yeah, that's a good one. So, Aaron?
One point I would make about what you were saying before about he doesn't really do anything that horrible in this movie, so he doesn't qualify as a villain. By only hearing about the horrible things that he does, we briefly see him doing some pretty horrible things to those guards, but those are security guards, and they were stupid, so you could say they got what they deserved in a way.
Yeah, they were.
But by doing that, by making him a villain by reputation, they managed to avoid a problem that they had in the second film, where he becomes a real horror figure, similar to Jason or Freddy or those type of guys, where he's going around brutally murdering and disfiguring people. Mm-hmm. It's much harder to like a guy like that. It's much harder to root for a guy like that. Mm-hmm. So I think that was one of the reasons why. I mean, I always thought that scene with him eating Ray Liotta's brain.
Yeah,
that's, humiliating to the character, and it makes us feel sorry for the guy he's killing.
Yeah, it's like, what the
Which is
hell is going on?
not the effect they should have gone for. I can think of other ways that they could have done that, where they would have suggested it, and we wouldn't gotten the horror of it, but we wouldn't have been forced to actually see the guy sitting there eating parts of his own brain. That wasn't handled properly. I have a feeling that they did that simply because they were just delighted that they could do it effectively with the special effect that they'd come up with.
Yeah.
That's not a good reason to do things.
No. Aaron?
Yo.
Silence of the Lambs. Last final thoughts.
No, I think we covered a lot of it, man. I mean, I've said why I liked it and where I see faults in it, and yeah, I've watched it many times, and I have enjoyed watching it. So it's in my top, it's in one of my favorite categories of thriller movies. So yeah, I'm not gonna hate on it at all. I mean, I did point out some stuff I always question, like why they do that way, but again, it was for the story. Make it more thrilling. Let's make it more outrageous, so people will talk about it. And that's what it was. And a lot of films, I think, in the 90s were like that. I mean, come on, Crying Game. Everybody talked about that, for that scene. So that's what they were trying to do. Everybody's trying to outdo each other. Like, what can we do to shock suburban America? And let's put this in here and show an autopsy and show a guy that's dressing like a woman dancing and collect skin. And, I think that's what it was all about. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's my idea of what that whole, that movie is about. So I do enjoy it though.
Yeah, I do enjoy it. I wouldn't say it's not even close to being on my top 10 list. Erik, you've given me a lot to think about, so
yeah,
maybe you can like completely change my mind here. Give me your final thoughts
Carey's
on it.
Mind.
I don't think it's a badly made film. I don't deny that there is incredible artistry on display. It just does nothing for me. It's just one of those films that I cannot connect with. And I can watch it and recognize all that's good about it. I just can't find a heartbeat.
There you go.
All right. Well said.
Yeah.
I'm just glad we had something we didn't all agree on.
I will say this, and people want to have a better understanding of a great story and about the behavioral sciences unit. Mindhunter on Netflix. Great. I mean,
That's a documentary?
No, this is a TV show. It's based off of the real cases. Of course, they have the real, people playing the characters of these serial killers and how they did makeup on these guys. I mean, it looks crazy. Even the guy, I want to say season 2, or is it 3? One of those where they have a guy playing Manson, and that actor just blew me away. I felt like I was watching Charles Manson, and that right there. I don't want to go too much into it because I love that show, but yes, that is more where you see the different, how these guys work, how the behavioral sciences started, and what they did to start profiling and then helping law enforcement with cases. I think that's a better interpretation of it than Silence of the Lambs. So that's my recommendation.
All right. So Erik, what are you working on, and where can everybody find your previous library of work?
I'm working on a couple of projects right now that I can't discuss yet, but the moment that I can, I will be on here and I will pimp them. In the meantime, if you want to check out my films, I made a feature film called Roulette and another one called Butterfly Kisses. They are streaming on Prime right now. Check them out, or you can buy the Blu-ray wherever Blu-rays are sold. I write for Ain't It Cool News, typically on the topics of franchise history and genre theory. Cool. And as I always tell everybody when I'm signing off here, make sure that you like and you rate and leave those reviews, share on the social media, do it for this show, do it for all the work that all of us do. That's what influences the algorithms. So influence them, help get this content out there.
All right, William.
Well, just a final thought on Silence of the Lambs.
You're right.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I remember the 80s as being a pretty dark time. Maybe I'm different from most horror film fans, because that was the time when slasher films became the rage. And the classic horror figures dropped into the distance. And it was all about brutal murders being depicted on screen. The fact that a film like this can have the effect that it had, and I would argue that its popularity at the time and its continued popularity is proof that it was an effective thriller without having any of that stuff. I mean, the gore in this is fairly mild. The fact that it could be effective just through storytelling, just through dialogue, is very impressive to me. And I still feel that Clarice is, along with Ripley, the two characters that anybody who's trying to create a strong female character in a movie, anybody who's trying to create a strong character in a movie should look to. As far as I'm concerned, I'm still working on the same shit. So there's no difference from the last one. I will say Demon Resurrection, my film Demon Resurrection is on Tubi TV now, so that can be found with ads. And I was surprised to find that the ads didn't really damage it that much. So I was happy. Sort of reminded me of when I was a kid watching the movies that inspired Demon Resurrection on local TV stations.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a similar viewing experience. So that is available on Amazon Prime, and that's available on Tubi TV. And of course,
there's no excuse for people not to watch this.
There's no excuse.
Just watch it.
Yeah.
You've run out of excuses, America.
All right, Aaron.
I am working on a reboot of the Beethoven franchise, and I'm no.
He's a serial killer in this one.
Yes. He's a mashup between Hannibal Lecter and you can find me at They Call Me Mr. Poe on the Slasher app, on Instagram, and on Twitter, and of course my new show, which I'm proud to say is a part of our little network. It's called The Caw, where I talk to various people that, either do music. I've already talked to an author. I'm having fun with it. I get the one-on-one with some people. So yeah, check it out and support our little group, that we have, our little production thing we got going on. And B Movie TV Sunday nights, Side by Side show, new episodes coming out next month. I've been kind of busy. My oldest son's graduating. So I've been caught up in all that. Thank you. And I've been doing the dad stuff. So, but I'm about to get right back on there. So new episodes coming soon.
Great.
All right. I got to bring up something from our last episode that we did, which was the Blood Beat episode. But we were talking about low budget movies having driving scenes to kind of fill time, right? Film the guy, and I was like, well, it works if you're Tarantino, because it's Jules and their, the conversations that they have when they're driving and walk up the steps. And listen to the episode again, I was like, you know what I forgot to mention, and I don't know why I done it. Hitchcock done the same thing.
Yeah.
If you think about Vertigo, there's like
ton of driving.
It seems like hours of like just James Stewart following Kim Novak.
The problem with Hitchcock is he never wanted to go out on location, so all that stuff was done in the studio and looks pretty fake now. But
right,
he did a lot of, even in Psycho.
It's like, well, I was gonna say Psycho, he done it, but it worked in Psycho because when they're you can hear her thinking about everything that happened and people asking questions. Right. It builds that tension. Right. In Vertigo, it's just him driving, and I don't know what he did or why that's not boring when you watch it.
Well, I think the fact that he's able to make it not boring is, part of why he was called the master. I know opinions vary onto, sort of Hitchcock's overall body of work rather than just, sort of the select films that are commonly believed to be masterpieces like Psycho and Vertigo and The Birds and Rear Window. But, in Psycho, William's absolutely right. I mean, that ratcheting the tension up through Janet Leigh driving, and actually, I think Carey said that ratcheting that tension up really worked there. With Vertigo, I think it worked by virtue of the fact that movie was an elaborate puzzle that was being assembled in front of you. And so Stewart's sort of quest, you know, feels like you are moving to the next puzzle piece, to the next puzzle piece. And I could see why some people, particularly modern audiences, might find that, you know, overdone or slowing down the pace. But I think it made sense in 57 when that came out.
When you think about all those film noir movies from the 40s, the private detectives are always in their car. They're always driving someplace. I mean, in some of the Sam Spade and Philip Marlowe movies, the car is almost like a second character. You know, it's the main, one of the main locations of some of those films. The thought occurred to me too when I was thinking back about what we were talking about, that back in the day, a car really was a pretty significant thing in people's lives. It was a status symbol. It was a form of personal expression. It really was some production value in a movie to show that the hero had a fancy car, or, you know, a car that expressed his personality. And certainly carries over into the James Bond movies, where again, the car is like the main tool that he uses, right?
Yeah, because that's what they talk about when these new James Bond movies come out. They're like, did you see the new Audi in that trailer? It's like, okay, but that's what, you're right. I never thought of it that way, but yeah.
Which is funny because the character with the coolest car of all time is Batman, and we've had like 27 of those movies, and he spends what, like a minute in the car in each film?
Yeah.
Right. I'm still a fan of the TV series Car, to be honest.
Oh yeah, dude.
That's my preference.
Burt Ward and Adam West.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I love that one.
All right, we'll take the 89 Batmobile over anything else.
I was going to say,
that's the Tim Burton
my favorite, yeah.
That is the Tim Burton one, and if I had the ability to pick my date up for the prom in that car, that would have been the car.
Oh, hell yes.
Where would your date go?
Behind the life-size Kim Basinger, Kim Basinger mannequin that I'd have sitting in the car all the time.
All right, so you can find me on Twitter, 1313 Inc. And of course, you can find our Facebook group and our page. If we're on Facebook, just look us up there. And until next week, we will continue to watch The Good, the Bad, and the Cheaply Made.
It has been established